Hi folks, welcome to this formula building tutorial. Basically the way that I build the formulas based on the SASAMS mark sheets for our mark sheets that pull the synchronize the marks with SASAMS as well as pull the marks into the reports, into the front office reports. Okay, so let's take a simple example like um, let's say grade 4 mathematics. Now there is a kind of almost the more standard formula that you'll see cropping up a lot, and it's used in many of the subjects, and that is basically this one over here. Okay, and if you have a look at it, it's basically two sections. Alright, that is basically if I say basically again, um, that is the first column of marks, and that is the second column of marks. Okay, and what it's doing is it's taking the mark, alright, that's in the block, and I'll show you this now on the mark sheet itself, dividing it by the amount that it's out of, the test is out of, multiplying it by 100 to get it into a percentage, and then multiplying it by its weighting. Okay, then the second column is done in the exact same way. Okay, so the percentage is calculated, it's multiplied by the weighting, and then it's divided by the sum of those weightings, which is invariably 100%, but not necessarily, and that gives you an overall percentage for the term. So let's have a look at mathematics. Okay, let's have a look at a mark sheet that gets produced. Okay, and what we'll even do is we'll look at one in SASAMS as well. So let's say that the child gets 41 and let's say 44. They're equally weighted. Now essentially, as I've pointed out, you can just take this formula and paste it in there. Okay, but let's just have a look for argument's sake to see how actually this is built. So let's get a class up here. Okay, this is a fairly standard one to examine because it follows a very standardized approach in terms of the marks they're out of and the weightings. Trust the maths department to make it simpler for all of us, ironically. Okay, and so you're coming out with a mark of 86. Again, in this case, it's actually fairly simple to see that you're just adding the two together. But okay, if we put the same marks into the mark book, okay, then what we're doing is we're saying that the formula equals the mark, right, divided by the mark that it is out of. Okay, and we want to say multiplied by 100 in order to get a percentage. Alright, so in this case, for that first column, we can see that actually the mark is 82%. Okay, and you can actually see that 41 out of 50 we know is 82%. Okay, but now we want to multiply it by the weighting. Okay, so in this case we go, oops, sorry, and there are examples down the road where, say, the weighting is 60-40, and so the first test possibly weighted slightly more than the second test, so that becomes relevant. In this case, it kind of cancels out in the sense that you're multiplying, but in the sense that both marks are exactly the same, so you can in effect just add them together. Okay, so we've got multiplied by 100 multiplied by the weight. Okay, and that represents the first column. Alright, and now we're going to say plus. And we're going to do the same thing with the second column. It's mark divided by the total, multiplied by 100, multiplied by the weighting. Okay, put that into its own argument, if you like, and then say, now what we want is we want this whole lot to be divided by the sum of the weightings, because remember we've multiplied them by the weightings, so you're going to get some sort of large figure. If I just take that out for example, you'll see you're arriving at some sort of large figure, obviously, because we have multiplied them out by the weightings. So now it's just time to divide them by the sum of the weightings. So, but first of all, you've got to tell it that you want this whole section to be divided by the sum of the weightings. Okay. Right. So that's easy enough to get the first cell to work. Now, in order to be able to just copy and paste this cell down, we want the cell to, when we copy and paste it down, we want it to change, automatically know that the formula must change to saying D10, alright, instead of D9, and E10 instead of E9. Okay, but we don't want it to jump down from D7 and E7. We want the blocks to stay there. We want it to keep jumping to that reference. But if we just simply copy and paste this formula down, you'll notice that right, if I go and click in this formula now, right, let's just get enter out of the way. If I go and click in that formula, you'll notice that these blocks we reference at the top have all jumped down one of their own accord because we've gone down a block. So there is a way that you can force them to remain constant. Okay, there's a way that you can force it so that a new formula always goes back to the same cell that the previous formula was referencing. Okay, and I'll explain what I mean now. So what you do if you want to hold the row constant, in other words, we want to hold the row to being 7 even though we're copying and pasting down the cells, and we want to hold that row to being 6, and the way you make something constant is by using the $sign. So if we go $7, and to make it easy for yourself, you can just say hold the 7s and hold the 6s. Okay. Right. And now you can see that you can copy that formula now I have been asked by folks, just on a quick side note, if they could copy and paste their marks across from their own mark sheet that they've calculated, let's say for instance. And you can, in the sense that anything where you put a 1 above, alright, that is going to go into the report display 1 column, alright, or if you like, the term 1 column in FrontOFFICE, and that's what's going to show in your report. So whatever you put in there, you could just type a number in there, and that is what will go. Whatever number ends up displaying in here is what will go into the FrontOFFICE report. But just remember that with these marks that go through to SASAMS, okay, so this 41 and 45 would go through to SASAMS. I wouldn't need to capture them in here like I've done. I've just done that for the sake of comparison. The 41 and the 45 would go into SASAMS when you do a mark sync, a true mark sync. But this total weighted mark calculates itself. So you may have a problem if you do that your marks don't correlate, your final marks don't correlate with what's in SASAMS. So just be careful when you're doing that, that things are still corresponding. Okay, so now you can see that I've copied that formula down. Alright, I don't have any marks, so it's reflecting 0. But if I click on this formula, it's showing me the blocks that it's now using. Alright, so it's staying with those 4 blocks at the top, which is what we're wanting it to do, and it's jumping down 1 because it's in a new row. Okay, and you could copy and paste that formula all the way down. Right, then let's move on to something slightly more complicated. So we've got here English grade 4. Right, the first thing to notice is, so the only difference here is that in our mark sheets, as I've explained before, the task columns in SASAMS that are calculated columns, in other words, these red columns, don't show up in our mark sheet because it would be confusing to the staff member to know if they were supposed to be capturing something into that column or not. What we do to simplify the matter is we put only the columns where marks would be captured into, okay, into the mark book. So if you look at these first two, 15, 25, 15, 20, 25, okay, 15, 25, 15, 20, 25, okay, that follows exactly. There are 1 or 2 small cases, folks, where the columns are different. But just look carefully, they're in a slightly different order, but that doesn't mean, but they will definitely still correlate to the correct task, even if they're in a slightly different order, okay, because they will carry these task reference and activity reference, which is for our use really, but it does follow, even if it's slightly out of order, it will be the correct, it will go to the correct place, the mark you enter will go to the correct place. Okay, so what we do in this situation is that the simple thing to see in SASAMS is that if you enter marks, alright, that the marks for the activities, okay, these yellow columns, add up to become a mark for the task column. Okay, in this case it just so happens that the marks add up to 100. In some cases they may not add up to 100, but the mark will be converted to whatever they put this max mark out of, okay. So if they made it out of 200, for example, and these marks added up to 100, then the mark would simply be 85 times 2, which is 170. But that's not really important. Don't worry too much about that. But so the actual final term mark you can see, which is 83.5, is taken from task 85.1 and task 2 82, and added together and divided by 2, and it's divided by 2 because you can see the weightings are 50-50. Okay, so what does that mean for the formula in the mark book? Okay, so essentially this is the formula here, okay, and it's saying the sum of D9 to H9, so in other words D9 to H9, so in other words these ones here, the sum of those, okay, divided by the sum of the totals, okay, it's saying the sum of these ones divided by the sum of the totals. In other words, what it's doing is it's working out the first percentage for this column, okay, and then so in other words it multiplies by 100. So the sum of the marks divided by the sum of the totals multiplied by 100, okay, gives you the percentage for the first task. And then the second task is obviously the sum of these ones here, okay, these 4, which on your SASAMS sheet correlates to these 1, 2, 3, 4 marks here, okay, the sum of those divided by the sum of the totals of those tests, right, multiplied by 100 to give you the percentage, and then as we said, all of these essentially are divided by 2 because it's that percentage plus that percentage, okay, so in other words that percentage plus that percentage divided by 2, right, that percentage plus that percentage divided by 2 gives you the final mark. So we can actually put this into the mark book. Okay, so we're saying that equals sum of the first activities, okay, which goes up to there, right, divided by the sum of the totals, divided by the sum of the totals, right, multiplied by 100, right, that takes care of the first set of activities, puts them into a mark that they would occur as a task. Okay, let's deal with the second set, which is going to be the sum of those ones, right, divided by the sum of the totals, right, multiplied by 100. Okay, now we want to put that whole section in its own bracket, and then the whole numerator in its own bracket, because that is now going to be divided by 2. Okay. Sorry, I got my brackets in a slightly wrong place there. Right, so yeah, as I was saying, divided by 2. So now in order to get this formula to stay, to hold on to the max marks at the top, whilst we move the formula down, we know that the rule of thumb is hold the 7s, hold the 7s, and the 6s. We don't have 6s in this case, we're not doing something like that. Hold the 7s. Okay, and if we were to put the marks across, so we've got 13, 22, 12, 17, 21, 22, 17, 16, and 27. You get to 84. As I've pointed out, our Marksheets rounds up, but the mark that actually goes through to front office will be the 83.5. It's just that this particular cell has been told to format to be a rounded figure for its display purpose. Okay, that concludes part 1 of the tutorial. I'm going to make a second part showing some of the senior for the FET phase, formulas for the FET phase. These 2 formula examples should pretty much show and explain to you any of the other formulas that we've used. Reason I'm going to show the grade 10 formulas, some of them that I came up with, is so that you can then apply the same logic to do the grade 11 and 12 formulas on your side.